Mission of the Beehive Design Collective, we produce these giant black and white illustrations. Our mission, we say, is to cross-pollinate the grassroots by creating images that can be used as effective teaching tools. So rethinking how typically our lesson plans are linear, or we can only think of something in one direction. We're trying to give you a method of creating idea maps that aren't linear, that you can jump from one idea to the other and see the interconnectedness of everything. So this is the graphic that we worked on with Rising Tide. More cars equals more climate change equals more hurricanes. We collaborated with Katrina. Yeah.
Critical mass. There was an action that Brian showed you before where people rode around remembering the anniversary and drawing the connection between climate change and climate justice. So that's what this was produced for. But to talk a little bit more about ourselves, has anyone seen a Beehive presentation before, just out of curiosity? Not so many, okay, good. Well, you're in for a treat, I guess. So we're a political graphics collective based in Eastern Maine. We're on our Western Coast tour right now. We're known for lots of different things. We're an anti-copyright collective, which means that our work can be reproduced. You notice that our work's in black and white. That's because we believe that the work isn't ours. We're just kind of conveying the stories that people told us to here. So people are welcome to use our clip art, use our posters. They're black and white reusable, easy reproducibility. And we want people to continue and take those stories, like we're going to tell you the series of stories about colonization and globalization tonight. We want you to take them with you and spread them to other people.
So the trilogy that we're about to show you consists of the first graphic being the Free Trade Area of the Americas, which is pictured here also. The second being Planet Columbia, and the third is going to be our work in progress of 3 years, which we spent quite a bit of time revising, adding more information to. It's going to be worth every minute that we've gone over our 5 deadlines that we've given ourselves. But so we're going to be zooming out a little bit to provide background to how we came to be here and how the global systems are working that are creating things like climate change.
Like I was saying, we're really based on storytelling. These graphics, the one over there, the Free Trade Area of the Americas graphic, was originally designed as kind of a flyer for the Free Trade Area of the Americas protest that happened in Quebec and Miami. What we found out is that as we were trying to put all of these issues together on one page, it took some amount of explaining. So this aspect of us coming and talking to people directly about the images evolved, and we found out that it's a really effective way of spreading information, just mouth to mouth. We move around a lot, we cross-pollinate the grassroots. You got a poster, there's a very good chance you got it from one of us. We don't really have a store, we've just got an internet thing going. But we travel around. This is us in Maine. We like to check in with our supporting community. This is at the Mofka Community Garden Fair. It's one of the biggest organic fairs that happens in the United States.
We got our start here going to country fairs and small local events where, despite our politics being extremely radical, we'd be right in front of farmers and gardeners talking shop, talking about the very same issues. Like she said, now 60,000 people are traveling through this fair in 3 days. It's an opportunity for people to check in on us and see the things we've been up to and connect with where we're at in Eastern Maine. This is like an example of what's over here. That would seem trite, except for the fact that if you've gotten a Beehive poster, you've probably gotten it from us. And the important thing there is that we interact with our audience directly. If you have something you want to say, if you have a comment about a graphic or something you're not sure about, you can talk directly with the bees. So we're extremely open to critique and criticism, and that goes for the people we've spoken with in the Global South. So when we create these graphic campaigns, we still try and engage as much as we can, figure out what we got right, what we got wrong, and modify the story. Typically, when we do a presentation, there will be 1 or 2 comments that are going to make it to the next presentation. So the story itself is fluid and malleable. This is at the School of the Americas demonstration, an annual demonstration that happens in Fort Benning, Georgia.
Just to piggyback off that, if you know anything, we're not experts here. We don't know necessarily everything that we're talking, that we got portrayed in these images. So if you have a comment or a story or know something, please interrupt us. We're not talking heads. We're just folks.
So there's multiples of these banners, and they travel all around the Americas. They've even started traveling outside of the Western Hemisphere. There's graphics that have been displayed in Germany and Australia, posters distributed outside. Because the issues are very applicable, we've distributed the FTA graphic in India, for instance, talking about trade there. This is in San Salvador. These graphics are taken from our recent trip through from Puebla, Mexico to Panama, so through the Isthmus of Central America to gather information for our next graphic campaign. What you're looking at here is a teacher's training school in Honduras, particularly the town of La Esperanza, where we were very road weary, and we showed up and we asked for an audience for the school. We showed them our work and were granted an audience with the entirety of the school. And the kids stole the show. We couldn't get a word in edgewise. They were able to say, wow, that applies so much to our situation here. I recognize this aspect of the story. Wow. And it wasn't necessarily Colombia. Though the graphic is depicting Colombia, they were fully capable of making the connections. This is in Ecuador, where a controversial pipeline is being constructed to connect with the Colombian network. And women's community in Nicaragua. This is our commander-in-chief. No, this is talking about how when we're finished with this trilogy, we're going to be compiling these graphics into a coloring book project to be used as a teacher's curriculum for middle school and high school teachers. So this is one way that people interact with the graphics, coloring them in, taking a lot of time to meditate over the subject matter and really kind of chewing on it. The posters are different from a lecture or a book, which while we go through the story, it may be difficult to remember everything. It's also something that lives on your wall. It's not a book that you fold up and put away or a lecture that you might forget every word. It's something you can interact with on a daily basis. So we forget what to say on the slide, but that's okay. Does anyone want to say anything? Oh, right, okay.
What was that about the technique?
Yeah, exactly, the technique. So our graphics are basically giant tattoos. They take a long time to make. Each of these, the first versions took about a year, and then we went ahead and did second editions of them. This is the second edition of the Free Trade Area of the Americas. So what I want to do now is just kind of take you through a little tour of the chronology of the Beehive's works. And chances are, if you've seen us or heard about the Beehive, it's through these graphics. There's a whole other aspect to what we do, which we'll talk about right at the end of our hour, before we go back to speakers about rising tide and energy. We initially began with graphics focused on the issues of biotechnology and the idea of how biotechnology isn't necessarily all it's being sold as. There's some negative aspects to biotech. In this graphic, we're talking about how the genetically modified corn is affecting monarch butterflies. Why are monarch butterflies so important? Well, they're one of the most amazing pollinators in North America. They actually travel the route of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, from Mexico to Canada. And increasingly their generations are born weaker and weaker because of susceptibility to the effects of this pollen. So the imagery is pretty simple. Butterfly with a gas mask, corn represented as this sort of dangerous hypodermic needle. And the goal here is to make a poster that's enthralling and somewhat educational about a counter-conference that happens to the annual Biotech Industry Organizers Conference. So the counter-conference is called Biodevastation. This year it's being held in Boston. You can check out biodev.org if you're interested or want more information. We progressed on from talking about only biotech to talk about how biotech is sort of symptomatic of the people in power, the scientists, the industry, and government working sort of colluding, and how they're trying to homogenize life itself. And so there's different boxes containing the similarities we can see in our daily lives. We might find suburbia in any town looking quite the same. We feel strangely comfortable and familiar with finding a Michaels and a Joann Fabrics next to a Starbucks and a Walmart, even though we've never even been to this part of the world. Monoculture crops, we already mentioned. And the idea of manufactured desire. I don't know any of you, but the chances that we can bond over some crappy 80s sitcom are pretty high. We can bring up Tom Cruise's face faster than we can bring up our own grandpa's face, and there's something there to be said about where we're getting our information, why television is called programming.